podcast about the people behind the commits. I'm here today with Brendan O'Leary. He is a developer relations engineer at Kilo Code. Welcome to the show, Brendan. Tell us about yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Chris.
Yeah.
Glad to be here. Yeah, I'm Brendan. I work in developer relations. I've been in developer relations for a long time, but longer than that, just kind of been involved in coding and shipping code to production and kind of everything that goes along with that. I've worked in product, I've worked in engineering, and then kind of found my passion in developer relations and helping other developers ship code.
So I've been in DevRel for almost a full year, although I feel like, I mean, I've said this before too. I was doing forms of developer relations before I was actually like had that as a title. And also one of the things that I've observed since kind of being in the space more and meeting other people that are doing DevRel is that it means a lot of different things depending on the organization, the team, where it sits in the like org
hmm
structure. What does developer relations look like for you at Kilo Code?
Yeah, that's a great question. And yeah, where it sits and all of that is like the best part of developer relations is bike shedding what developer relations is, right? Yeah, so at Kilo Code, we're really focused on delivering an agentic AI. It's an open sourced um, VS Code extension that helps
Okay.
folks use all the different AI models that are out there to try and supplement what they're doing as an engineer. And so developer relations was an early uh, focus for us because all of our customers, all of our users are developers. And I think that um, what I always say about developer relations in general is like a lot of folks like to say, oh, it should sit in engineering or oh, it should sit in marketing. And at the end of the day, like some developer relations folks get mad at me about this, but at the end of the day, it is developer marketing, right? Like that is what it is. Like
Yep.
obviously, I think it's obvious to everyone or people that are in, software that developers don't like being marketed to through traditional channels, um, but would rather be able to try something, put their hands on it, understand how it works, maybe even inspect the code behind it, right? That's why open source is such a popular
Hmm.
methodology. And so, in order to enable that, I think you need a human connection with people. And so, that's what we are really focused on: is how can we connect with people and make them successful with the tool, and then kind of the rest of it is the score takes care of itself, right? Like all of the revenue and all the other things can follow that. But if you don't execute on that well, you're just constantly fighting uphill if you want to try and make something work with developers.
So tell me about what Kilo Code is or does, and about sort of um, the the AI integration that you're building or working on or sharing with other
Sure.
people. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that'd be great. I think. Yeah. So I'll kind of give you like maybe a little bit of my path to there, which I think then answers
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
what we're doing and why I think it is a way of attacking this problem. I think there's a lot of like AI maximalists out there that will say, for the past 2 or 3 years, we've said, oh, we're 6 months away from there never being a software engineer anymore.
Hmm.
And then there's a lot of, I think, also skepticism from the, like rightly earned skepticism from developers and software engineers who have seen either, the slop that early AI models produced, or the kind of vibe coding methodology that has not been super successful for people that don't understand how the code works.
Hmm.
So I would say I think that the reality is somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
I say I don't think that AI is going to replace software engineers, but I do think a software engineer that uses AI is going to replace software engineers. Um, I think it's a tool that represents probably yes a step change, but again, I don't even need to be a maximalist to say that if you look at statistics from Stack Overflow, if you look at what people are talking about in the SEO world, just in general, with the rise of models like ChatGPT that are making massive traction throughout the world, not just in software engineering. I think the reality is that if you're an engineer today that's saying, yeah, but AI, it's a fad, it'll pass. That's like somebody saying, oh, Stack Overflow, that's a fad, it'll pass. Or, oh, Google, yeah, that's a fad, it'll pass. at those times. Like, is it overhyped and probably a big, the latest overhyped venture capital bubble? Sure. But is it going to just go away one day because of that? No, right? The internet. There
Hmm.
was a time when that people thought of the internet that way, or they thought of the web and dot coms that way. And yeah, there had to be this equilibrium to find reality, but the reality now is that we all have the internet in our pocket and at our fingertips every minute. I think that's going to be the reality for AI. So sorry, that's like a very philosophical way of coming to what does Kilo Code do?
Yeah,
Um,
I've
so
got
Kilo
questions, but
Code,
we'll come back to them.
yeah. So yeah, Kilo Code lives in VS Code, so it's a VS Code extension, um, and then we just interface to the models, right? So like we're not inventing any
Yeah.
foundational model, but we allow you to say, oh, I want to connect to Sonnet 4, or I want to connect to Gemini, right? Like what model do I want to connect to? And then our tool has a number of agents that can then take action, right? Like an orchestrator that plans out with the agents, a
Okay.
architect that doesn't just code right away. It plans out the
Yeah.
architecture, what it's going to do. A code agent that codes, right? And so it's kind of this different world where, again, agent is like an overloaded term right now, but it's this different world where you don't just throw code slop at a person from a prompt, but you actually like pair program with the AI. That's
Hmm.
the idea behind Kilo Code.
So I've been using Klein in VS
Mm.
Code recently,
Hmm.
instead of uh, GitHub Copilot, which is what everyone obviously uses and talks
Yep.
about. So, and Klein has a plan mode and an act mode, and plan mode is kind of like the we're going to talk about the thing and come up with a solution. And
Yep.
then the act mode is like, okay, I've done this thing. Do you want me to do the thing? Because if you do, then click over to act mode, and then I'll do the thing, and then you can say,
Yep.
yeah, okay. So it sounds like you have a similar sort of approach, but maybe like another layer in between, kind of.
Yep. And the fun fact there is we actually forked a project called Rue Code when we started the company. Which the fun fact there is Rue Code is a fork of Klein. So
Okay.
there's a lot of
Yeah.
relation between those three packages.
Yeah.
Um, and we're actually pretty big contributors back to Rue because of that. Rue and Klein kind of split 6 months ago or so, like in terms of like kind of the direction they're going as projects, but they're all open source, right? And so I think that's actually why we see now VS Code reacting and saying, "Oh, we're going to make Copilot Chat open source," right? They just recently did that. In fact, the code was just released like last week. Um, I think that's a reaction to, oh, these open source tools are really gaining a lot of traction because again, developers want to be able to inspect what they're doing, right? They don't want to
Hmm.
necessarily just send a chat into the ether and not understand what happens back. So yes, it is not that different in kind of the methodology, but
Hmm.
the ways that our thought is that it is a very fragmented space, and what we want to do is be the superset of those tools, right? Because again, a thing that today, again, this will be out of date by the time someone listens to it
Yeah.
because
I
it's
mean,
AI.
exactly. Yeah.
But the thing today that like a root code or a client doesn't have is any like tab completion, right? Which is what I think
Yeah.
Cursor has a big share in the market because of. So that's something we
Right.
recently added. And so we want to build a superset of all the features to say, like, not have to have 17 different extensions to do stuff. But conceptually, this idea of an agent that has kind of a different set of rules for it, and a different kind of what are you about, um, is where those three kind of that family of extensions came from. And the beauty of like a Rue or us is like you can actually create your own um, mode, right? And
Hmm.
so, like if you look at our documentation or Rue's documentation, there's a documentation writer mode, right? That is very focused on like, hey, I'm going to give you a bunch of input, but what your output's going to be isn't code. It's going to be well formatted documentation with yes,
Yeah.
code snippet examples, but not just
Right.
code. Um, so yeah.
Hmm. Interesting. What I mean, I've talked about AI quite a bit on this show. Um and there's lots of stuff happening. I mean, it's the new
Mm-hmm.
shit, right? What brought you or interested you in this space initially? Like what about AI is um, is most exciting or interesting?
Yeah. I would say I wasn't interested at all to begin with, which is, I think,
Great.
a
That's what I
critical
like to
first
hear.
point. I never wanted to learn what different models meant. I never wanted to learn, like, I was not, I was very much not a maximalist. I was like one of those people that early on was like, I'm an elder millennial. So I was like, it's not AI, it's machine learning, for certain things.
Right.
And like kind of really
Right.
like an LLM is just makes you average. Like you don't want to be, you want to be better than average. Like, I've been kind of that kind of like naysayer for some time. And I think that's probably a big chunk of software engineers, again, because they tried it early. They're early adopters, right? Us software engineers are early adopters. And it was really bad. Like
Yeah.
even 12, 15, 18 months ago. The thing I point to there for folks, if I'm trying to convince them, but then I could talk about what convinced me, is like if you look at the classic, video generation prompt, which is Will Smith eating spaghetti, like yes, like 12, 18 months ago, it was horrible. It was
hmm
like fear, like nightmare inducing. And then if you look at the like VO3 or whatever, like from Google, it's pretty realistic and kind of crazy. And I think the models have done just as big of a jump in what they're able to do with code and what they're able to do acting again as an agent, which to me just means working with the human, not just spitting out the slop that
Yeah.
they're good at. And so what kind of convinced me, again, is what I was talking about earlier, is like I kind of got convinced that like, okay, once I started seeing what AI really looked like again, because again, I had tried it a while ago. I was using cursor and I was hitting tab a lot, which was helpful, but was it that much different than autocomplete?
Right.
Or language model? But what kind of convinced me is, again, I think that once I saw the speed that you can get with like when you understand the context and give it context, how much of a great pair programmer that becomes,
Yeah.
it's incredible. Like just even on my portfolio site, right? It's like if I have context to something and I say, hey, like see this, I want another model. Like this, here's an example, and my portfolio site's like is public too, so people could look. Like I have a portfolio site, it's got like talks. This is very DevRel-y. It's got
hmm
talks, it's got a blog. And then my wife and I recently went on a trip to Europe, and she's like, I really wish we just have like one. We were taking a journal, like actually an Apple's journaling app, which you can't share easily, it
hmm
turns out, which
hmm
makes sense. But she's like, oh, I just wish we could have that just on a site that I could just send people. And I was like, oh, I could do that. And so I said to it, to Kilo, or I mean, again, to many of these agents, it would work the same. I was like, hey, like, see this blog, see these talks. Like, I want that, but model it for like a trip diary. And
hmm
like when it has that context, it's like I could have coded 100% of what it did, but it took it literally 30 seconds.
Yeah.
And it would have taken me an hour or two, and it would have probably been the same. And so once I kind of learned how, again, what I think I was a big naysayer about was this concept of prompt engineering, but it kind
hmm
of is a thing. It's like this
Yeah.
context engineering is what I'm hearing a lot of people talk about now. It's like when you can give it context, it is really fast at the things that I already know how to do.
hmm
Um, and it's really good at figuring it out too and working with me, right? Like now if I want to download like an open source tool that I'm interested in, the first thing I do is I go into ask mode, which doesn't write any code. It's like a not
hmm
allowed to. And I say like, hey, how does this project work, right? And it'll
Yeah.
show me. It'll write diagrams. It'll write a whole like flow. It'll really dig in and explain, because these models now have enough context to take in a massive amount of code. It can really explain it a lot better and works as a pair programmer better than I ever expected it would.
Yeah, I recently I noticed in one of the most recent Chat GPT updates they've added integrations with like deeper integrations with like Google Drive, and also integrations with GitHub, so that you can authenticate with your Google user or your GitHub user,
Mm-hmm.
and then you can feed it like a actual project repository or like a document or whatever, and be like then start asking it questions about the context within that. I started like I half formed a project with AI to build. I have this like idea for um, my perfect sort of AI generated playlist app. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
I I go back to like back in the olden days when Pandora was actually good. The reason why Pandora was good is because they hired human beings with like music history and music knowledge backgrounds to create what they called phenomes that they applied to all
Mm-hmm.
the different songs and stuff that were in their database, so that when you said I want a playlist or a station based on this song, it was not just doing genre based connections like Spotify does. It was doing like, no, these are the component parts of that song, and here are other things that have similar component parts. And there's never been anything that's even remotely, and I'm like a music snob, right? I used to be a DJ. So like I was like I'm all about like creating like the perfect playlist, and that was the only thing that really created things that felt like a thing that I could have done or like made sense in the same sort of way. I did dislike how Spotify tries
Mm-hmm.
to do that and fails. Like it gets lumped into a very specific like rut, and
Yep.
then that's all it ever really gives you. So I've started going to like chat GPT and like asking it questions like, hey, I'm kind of feeling like this, and have a conversation with it. And then at the end it's like, okay, here's some stuff. And then I have to take those songs and put it into Spotify, and it's a manual process. So
Yep.
my ideal reality is I can just do that, and then it does the thing for me, and it creates the playlist. So it authenticates with Spotify, and it creates the playlist for me. So I had this like half-formed thing with like bits of code that don't connect to anything. There's some API stuff in there, but it's not fully. And but like I noticed that it had this feature. I'm like, okay, tell me what's missing and what's wrong, and the things that don't connect, because I know that this isn't going to work. But I also like I haven't really I'm mostly just copying and pasting stuff at this point. I'm not even really thinking about the code yet. Like, so just tell me like the things that are there and not there, and it gave me like a really detailed report
Mm-hmm.
on like it's got this and this is good and this stuff is bad and this stuff is missing and this stuff you would need to do before. Like it was pretty comprehensive, almost like I could probably like then use it to like create like a list of GitHub issues, like things like task lists, things that need to be done. So yeah, the giving it context of like larger and larger swaths of information is really valuable. You were talking earlier about sort of how you know in the past people were using would you just use Stack Overflow, how it's impacting the way that developers in like get their consume their information, and also even having impacts on SEO. Um, I've been seeing things about like the decline of sites, the decline of like clicks on the links in
Mm-hmm.
search engines, because as search engines integrate with AI, then you don't need to click on the things if AI is just going to give you the summary up at the top. So it's having SEO impacts there, but also like I've like the decline in use in things like Stack Overflow, um, and I wonder about like at a certain point, because we're not at a point like at some point, maybe theoretically, I don't know, I'm not sure, but at some point in theory, at least if we listen to, all the gurus and CEOs of these companies, um, the belief is that we will have truly generative AI where it can actually come up with its own like answers to questions. But right now it's just finding something that exists in its data set and matching it to the patterns that it's being given in the prompt, which means that like for coding, it's looking at open source code, it's looking at the data from Stack Overflow or whatever, that existed at the time that it was last indexed, and using that to inform its answers. But if developers aren't using Stack Overflow, if developers aren't writing this code, and if all the code is being written by AI now, there's a certain like recursive loop that happens,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like what happens in the in between time when we don't have a fully like generative AI out there, but like also no one's putting new stuff out there either because they're just using AI for it.
Yep. Yeah, it's a really good question, and I don't know that I have the answer to it either, because, like, again, there's the maximalists, the CEOs of these companies that are going to say, "Oh, well, we have, we're, a few months from, actual artificial intelligence." And it's like, I mean, again, if
Yeah, no, no,
the
you're not.
argument, yeah, yeah, no, you're not, and the argument against that is like you're still selling your LLM to people. Like, if you were really that close, you would stop and you would just build every company,
Mm,
right? Right? It's like that. That's the best argument I've ever heard against like yeah, like obviously you're not, because you're not you would just write every other, you would just be the only company if
mhm.
you thought you could really do that. And I think you hit the nail on the head with this like feedback loop that I'm very worried about too, which is why I think taking a human out of the loop, in my mind, and again, this could get dated, and in 3 months someone could laugh at me for saying this, but like I just don't see the human coming out of the loop anytime soon. I
Yeah,
see the humans getting a lot more done, because it's like, goes to your point, right? Like I think Spotify and Pandora is the perfect example, because
yeah.
my experience with Spotify is it gets into that feedback loop, right? Like
Mhm.
if I want to shuffle it and like have it just kind of vibe with me, it's like I end up listening to the same 20 songs because it gets this feedback loop of like, yeah, Brendan likes that song, so let me
Right.
throw it back at him,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
Versus, the Pandora example, which is the like human curated algorithm in some ways, right?
Right.
Like, it's not, Pandora didn't have humans like typing on a computer when you were like listening to a song and be like, oh, Chris is listening to this, let me give this one to him next. But it
Right.
did have humans like curating that input
Yeah.
in such a way that it actually was something that like felt human to you, right?
Yeah.
And I think that that's where my theory is, that's where we're going to end up for a pretty significant period of time, because like you said, if you give today's LLMs more and more context, it's really good at then, oh, I've got a lot of stuff to read. Let me like distill it down. Like I that is what I use it for in my day-to-day work, is like if I have a whole bunch of stuff that I want to interpret and get some help with, and like kind of, brainstorm with someone on, like it's going to be really good at that. But if I don't give it that context and I just opened up Claude or ChatGPT and say, hey, what should I do as a developer relations engineer today? Like, yeah, it's going to be very generic AI feeling answers. It's going to be the Spotify DJ, which, sorry, Spotify friends, but it's not great. Um, right. But if I give it a little bit of love and I give it a little bit of
Mhm.
context, it's then gets, and it feels a lot better. I'm like, yes, okay, now this is enhancing what I'm able to do as a human,
Right.
not replacing it. Again, that's kind of my whole thesis for why I joined Kilo, because I do think that like an engineer that can use AI well is going to be a lot more productive, and thus replace engineers that are kind of like, uh, I'm never going to use AI. Um, and I think on the other end of that extreme, to your point, it's like if the people that just think that they can just go vibe it tomorrow, it's like that eventually returns to the mean. With LLMs, right? The concept of a large language model giving you the next most statistically likely token, it will necessarily revert to the mean. And they're getting away around that in a lot of ways, right? It's using reasoning inside
Mm.
to try and go back and forth a few times to make sure it's right. Um, but there just has to be a limit on that road that we're walking down. And sure, there may be something different that comes after it that is in a post LLM world. But right now, I think it just requires that human context, right? You're talking about task lists. It's like it's really good at consuming a task list and going point by point right now. Um, and it can be good given context coming up with those tasks, but like
Right.
those are still very human in the loop
Yeah.
situations. But like if you are a human in the loop and you start to learn how to use it, you can go a lot faster.
Yeah. The other conversation that I often bring up when I'm talking about AI with other developers is the idea that like especially with like a lot of companies going hard on AI and like using that to justify laying off junior developers or not hiring junior developers, is the idea that like yes, at this point probably LLMs can get us to a point where like maybe you don't necessarily need junior developers, but the analog that I bring up is like we don't have a lot of COBOL programmers either. There's a lot of COBOL code out in the world, particularly like in
Mm-hmm.
banks and government institutions and whatever. And the reason why Y2K was a thing was because nobody wrote COBOL anymore because they had all aged out and
Mm-hmm.
retired.
Yep.
And
Yep.
if we're no one's hiring junior developers anymore, and we have senior developers or mid developers that are reviewing the code that is written by AI, then no one's going to be a developer anymore because no one's like they're just going to go up, and no one's coming in at the entry level, and then we're going to be like what like AI just writing its own stuff and
Mm-hmm.
without with like off the rails again. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and like again with like theoretically maybe AI gets to the point where it can generate its own code and like check itself and make sure that it's not blowing up bank sites or
Mm-hmm.
other things. But like, yeah, that's the other thing that I think about like how the rise of AI
Mm-hmm.
is currently now, but even like later, like 5 years, 10 years, how that impacts
Yeah.
the roles of engineers in the tech
Yeah.
industry.
Again, happy to be wrong, but I think it's just a shift in skill set, right? Like my current theory is it's a shift in skill set, right? Like back in the day in automotive, I don't want to like oversimplify it, but like if you think about an automotive factory back in the day, there were probably like super highly skilled welders at every
Yeah,
station.
yeah,
And like, yeah, now there's a robot welder that's really good at it. And so
right.
there's probably less super highly skilled welders. There are lots of like verticals where that's not true, right? Like I don't know if you know about like underwater welding, but it's like very
Hmm.
well paid, skilled labor. But there's also labor in factories around how the robots work and making them work more efficiently and understanding how to use them and understanding how to design cars that can then be manufactured well. Like I think we'll see similar skill shifting in the mid to long term here because like yes, I think it will take maybe less total people to do things, but every time that we've seen that happen since the Industrial Revolution, it doesn't mean that there's like no jobs anymore. And I
Yeah.
don't think this will be it either. Again, I could my kids might be mad at me saying this in 10 years, but when they don't have a job. But I just think it's a shift in skills, right? Like I think you become more of this product focused engineer, right? I think
Mm.
if we were to see if everything you just described, which is again, a lot of people are talking about like it's possible, and maybe it is, but it's like why have we had product and product managers as a like a function this whole time, right? Like,
Right.
oh, why don't we just have engineers? Like, and there's lots of companies that have tried that and it hasn't gone well. Why? Because
Right.
it's kind of different specialized skills of like
Yeah.
understanding why and what we're building versus understanding how we're going to build it. And so I think it'll just be a shift in that kind of skill set where I think it will require a different kind of methodology where you still have to tell it what to build, right? And like again, we those of us that have been around software long enough know that like saying this is what we want the software to do and then like what that really means when it hits the real world are like
Hmm.
a very tough translation and always has been and always I think always will be, right? Because in your example of oh it's a bank and they've got zero software engineers or zero people minding the like AI self-governing thing. It's like
Hmm.
I don't think that's going to be real. I think if that were real today, the banks wouldn't have product people and they wouldn't have business people and
Yeah.
they would just have 5 engineers and it would be fine. Like why is that not fine? Well, because it's a diversity of skill sets. And so if AI becomes better at like you said, maybe the junior engineering kind of things, or maybe kind of more of the coding, right? And I think it's just an abstracted layer off, right? Like to your point, we don't have a lot of COBOL engineers because there's not a lot of COBOL. We also have like very few people relatively that are doing like machine coding, right? Like assembly level coding,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
why? Why? Because we have higher level languages on top of them, right? And
Yeah.
so like in my mind, it just might be, let's say we don't look at JavaScript anymore. Okay, maybe I could see that world. There will still be the English language or whatever language it's just another level of abstraction on top of it, right?
Hmm.
And they'll need people to handle it. And so to say that they're not, in my mind, is kind of like in the early days of very, very early days of computing, right? This is like talking about like Admiral Grace Hopper and like the early founders of our industry, right? It was like very much seen as like when computers were becoming a thing. Let's remember, if you've ever seen like Hidden Figures, like computer used to mean a person, and
Right. Yeah.
typically,
A computer, a person
yeah, a
who
computer was a
computes.
person who computes, and it was seen as this kind of lower level thing. And it was, oh, women are entering the workforce. Oh, we'll let women be the computers because it's not as high skilled, right?
Right.
And like obviously, and that led to a lot of the founders of our software engineering industry being women, which is fantastic, right? Like Admiral Hopper or Margaret Hamilton on the Apollo program.
Hmm.
But the reality is those folks said like, hey, we've got to treat this as an engineering skill, right? Like Margaret Hamilton, I have a whole talk that I did on her, and when she was working on the Apollo program, people thought of it as like, oh yeah, that's just the software. We're rocket scientists. That's the real engineering. And her point was like, this thing that I'm building is the Apollo guidance computer is going to be all of the telemetry for guiding us to the moon and back.
Right.
And guess what? If you miss, if anybody's seen Apollo 13, if you miss the angle of attack on the Earth's atmosphere, you either skip out or you burn up. So like, it's kind of a life safety issue too, the
Kind of important.
software.
Yeah.
And so she coined the term software engineer in a lot of ways, because she's like, we're going to treat this like an engineering discipline. Way off the rails of your question, but like what I think that just means to us is like, it's just a different skill set that evolves. And I think it's naive to say, again, could be naive of me to say this, but I think it's naive to say, oh, that'll just go away and it won't be a thing anymore. That's the same naivety of, oh, computers, yeah, that's just, yeah, let the lower skilled folks program because that won't be a thing anymore. It's like, obviously that was wrong.
The
um,
the auto manufacturing analogy is a really good one. I was recently looking at my like college programs with my son, and he's really interested. He was interested in the idea of robotics, and so I was looking at a robotics like actual program and what it involved.
mm-hmm.
And like most of what the robotics program involved was the working with and learning the software that programs the robots. Not
Yep.
like doing anything with the robots or building the robotics yourself, but like doing the stuff to tell the robot how to do the stuff that it does.
Sure.
And it's almost an exact parallel of the idea
Mm-hmm.
of like, yeah, we have this tool, and then we have the people that operate the tool, and the tool does the work, but like we're just one step removed. But you need to have the human like doing the stuff that tells the tool how to do its job. Otherwise, the tool is gonna,
Is
blow
not
up a
useful.
car or something. Yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think so.
Um,
I think the worst case scenario that I see is we get to that same place where, yes, there's a robot, ChatGPT, that's a lot better at writing export function,
mhm,
right? But the human still has to tell it like where we're going.
mhm. What moving all the way back? What sort of drew you into the world of developer relations? Seems like I was looking at your site, and you've been doing this for quite a bit. So what pulled you into developer relations?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think like you, I kind of been doing it for a long time, right? So I I spent my early part of my career at like not venture backed startups, but at small companies that were kind of like bootstrap funded, if you will. So in medical software, I spent 10 years in medical software. Um, and then I live on the East Coast of the US in Maryland, and everybody here is a government contractor. So I spent a little bit of
Mm,
time doing that. Um, but all of the time that I was doing that, I was managing engineering teams. I was managing product, um, and kind of a lot of that is developer relation, right? Like if you're an engineering manager, you do develop, like spoiler alert, you do some developer relations because you're relating with developers. Um, and then I got an opportunity to work at a startup, GitLab, and my first job there again was in engineering management because I had at this government contractor been responsible for GitLab's deployment at our government customer and at our own environment. And so I was like, oh, I understand GitLab. I can build an engineering team to deploy GitLab, and I did. And then I got to spend a little bit of time in product there. We were growing a lot, so I was like employee like 150 when I was hired in 2017, I think. And I was there for 5 years, and we grew to 3,000 people. So very fast, crazy growth. This is like ZERP.
Hmm.
This is this is a crazy time. And so we were growing all the time, and we were growing the product team, and I got a chance to step in and own the CI product for GitLab for about a year, which was crazy to me because it was the thing that made me fall in love with GitLab, the product to begin with, and now they're handing me keys to it. And all this time, there's this woman. Her name is Priyanka Sharma. She actually is now the executive director of the CNCF, where like Kubernetes sits. But the time she was at GitLab, and she kept asking me like, "Hey, come do developer relations." I kept saying, "No, I don't want to like travel that much, and I don't want to do all this." And the story I tell here is I was at an AWS reInvent, which is a massive conference for anyone that's never been, and I was working the GitLab booth. And in those early days of GitLab, this is let's say you are coming up, you're working the booth, you're going to work the GitLab booth. This is the early days working the GitLab booth, and I'm gonna walk in. I'm looking at you. I'm looking at your booth. Are you GitHub? Right, like that. this is what happened early days, right? It's like, no, we're not GitHub. Da, da, da. So this person came up and they were confused. Similar confusion, but even more. I realized, oh, they don't understand like what Git is.
Mm.
And like source code management, maybe even, or like definitely not
Hmm.
what Git is. And I was like, oh, okay, like forget GitLab, like whatever. Like let me show you. And so I grab this piece of paper and I start drawing like local repository, like your laptop, and like remote repository, like GitHub or GitLab, GitLab early, right?
Hmm.
And I'm like explain all this, and I get done, and they're like, okay, thanks. Like now they understand a lot more. And I turned to a friend of mine, and I was like, oh, man, that's the thing I would do for free. And that friend, they say to me, they're like, why won't you go work for Priyanka then? And I was like, you know what? You're not wrong. And so that is what, then I spent most of my career at GitLab in developer relations, and I've been doing it ever since. Yeah, it's just this concept of being able to like teach and like get people excited and be excited about the products. Like I've always worked with products that I've been excited about for one reason or another, ever since I worked at GitLab, for sure, if not even before that. And so, yeah, that's what got me into it. And now I've been doing it ever since. And so, yeah, I don't know, that was like probably 5 years ago now at this point. So it's been a long time.
Yeah, yeah, that's a similar. I feel like that's very similar. I don't know that I had the exact like I would do this for free, but like I was already doing it,
Mm-hmm.
like in engineering roles even before I was. I spent a couple years doing online developer training classes,
Mm-hmm.
like making